Hello and welcome to my channel, Maritime Arts. Today we're going to be painting this beautiful spring forest painting. I'm going to lead you step by step how to create this painting. Now, because we are all stuck at home right now and might not have exactly the same supplies, I'm also going to break down how to create this if you don't have exactly the same colors as me or exactly the same supplies. First, we are doing this in acrylic today. This painting can be done in watercolors or oils. You may just need to wait for different things to dry at different times to do it in oils, or just pay attention when you're doing it in watercolor what layers you're doing first and next, and that your watercolors, the ones that are going to be on top, are not transparent, but the ones underneath are transparent watercolors. So, my palette today, I have a titanium white, a chrome yellow, a phthalo green, a chrome green, a fluorescent green. I just have a burnt umber brown, a chrome blue, a bright red. Now, with the blue and the red, you just want a nice true blue and a true red, because those are the colors that we're going to use to mix to make those violets down here. And then with all these greens, if you don't have all these greens, you can still create this image. The most important thing is that you have a yellow and a blue. If you have these three primary colors with the addition of white, you can make any of these other colors. So when you are setting up your palette, make sure you have a blue, a red, a yellow, a white. You can make any shades of greens, even if you don't have the fluorescent or the chrome green or the phthalo green. So I am just looking at getting a few different shades of green in here, a few different shades of yellow, these purples. That's really all we need to do. Again, if you have all those primary colors, you can also make a brown. It might not be the same shade brown here, but really to make a brown, you want to use equal parts blue, red, and then twice as much yellow as you used blue and red to make a nice brown. The other supplies that I have today are a few different brushes. Now, again, I'm working on a 16 by 20 canvas, so I have a big brush here for that whole background. I have a 1-inch flat brush. If you're working on a smaller size, you may be able to get away with a smaller brush, but for me, I have the 1-inch flat brush. Then I go down to a 3/4 inch brush. That's kind of for some of these larger loops. If you're working on a smaller canvas, you might not need that. And then I have a 1/4 inch brush. That again is for some of these smaller dashes, some of these smaller loops in there. And then a small rounded brush for my tree trunks. If you don't have access to all these brushes, really what you want to make sure is you have at least one big brush, one small brush. That way then you can create all these different shapes. Now this painting is also able to be recreated in oils. You just need to pay attention to dry time and how much pressure you're putting on after your first layer, because you don't want it to turn too muddy. You can also recreate this in watercolor. Now with watercolor, again, you're going to have to pay attention to doing wet on wet for your background, letting it dry before you do your top layers on top of that. So it'll take some different times and steps for it to dry in between. To get started here today, we're going to start with this background, and I want to start with my lightest shade first, which is that very light, very pale yellow. Now all I'm going to do is take my biggest brush for my background, and I'm going to pick up some of my white and pull it to the side of my palette, and some of my yellow, give it a quick swirl, and get a big loop in here of my very pale yellow. That's my first step. Now once I get that yellow in, we're going to start changing up that color a little bit, and we're going to keep going in this loop shape as we go out. Now my next shade is actually going to be my yellow and white, and I'm just going to come over to my fluorescent green and pick up a little bit of my fluorescent green in there. Give it a quick swirl and come in and get those colors started in. Now, if you do not have that fluorescent green, you can create a nice bright green just with some yellows and some blues, or if you do have a green on your palette, add some of that green in. It does not matter if we have exactly the same colors here. It is the idea that we're going for, and we're just trying to make this beautiful, bright, spring-like image. Now, I'm going to keep going in and rubbing in. As you can see, I have a lot of yellow there. I'm going to rub in some of that fluorescent green into my yellow and pull it out to the sides. Now I want to show you too, if you don't have that fluorescent green and maybe you just have a little bit of plain green or just the blue and the yellow, you can still get a beautiful color up there. So that's another shade of green. Still looks really nice. I'm going to come in and mix some yellow with it just to soften it up a little bit. Now here, the most important thing while you're doing this part is making sure that you don't have a gap. So where mine, I'm wiping my brush off a little bit in between these colors, where I had my soft white yellowy tone and my other green tone, I'm just going to make sure I go over those so I don't have a line that distinguishes those. I'm going to take that color all the way to about 1/4 of the way down on my canvas. So that's that greenish yellowy tone with a little bit of that white still in. We're going to take that all the way down. Now I do recommend when you guys are painting this at home that you take that color around those side edges, those top edges. Really make it a finished piece so that you can hang this when you are done. I'm going to keep going with this color just a little bit longer. And while I'm going to fast forward the video so you don't have to watch me paint all this in. And like I said, go about 1/4 of the way down my canvas, so it's about right in there before I change up that color. So now that you've got your beautiful light yellow arch in and those yellowy green tones coming down about 1/4 of the way around down your canvas, we're going to change up that color a little bit. So now I have this great periwinkle tone and I'm going to recreate this color, rinsing off my brush really well. I'm still using that big brush, cleaning all that green and yellow out of there, drying it off on my paper towel. And I'm going to recreate that color by coming in and picking up my blue and my red are right next to each other on my palette. I'm just going to pull them up, give them a quick swirl. I have a little bit more blue than red in there. And then I'm going to come pick up some white and mix it in there. So for a periwinkly tone, we want to make sure we have a little bit more blue than red. Now again, this is all personal preference. If you want the tone to be a little bit different, you can make that tone a little bit different. If you don't have the same blues or the reds as me, it doesn't matter. You can still get a beautiful tone in there. Now I'm overlapping a little bit. My green isn't really wet. I really spread it out thin so it wasn't a thick tone of it. If your color is still a little too wet, just make sure you are not rubbing it in and turning it to mud where they meet. Just be very cautious of that. We're going to come in and get about, and I say about 3 to 4 fingers down with this new tone. You might be able to hear my kids in the background. They're upstairs watching TV. It's football draft night. I have a kid who's very into that. And so you might hear some yelling. Sorry about that. I'll try to edit out as much of that in the end as I can. But otherwise, that's life right now. We're all in this together. We're all in the house together. You're going to hear my kids. So again, I'm making just a little bit more of the color. I didn't quite have enough. And this, when you're doing the background, the most important thing is making sure that you don't have a lot of little white specks coming through on that canvas, that you've got a nice even coat over the canvas. All those white specks, yes, a few of them will get covered up. We will be able to play with it and get rid of some of it, but some of that might just ruin this in the end. So try and make sure you don't have all those little white specks coming through. I'm again making more of that periwinkle color, which is just a little bit of red, a lot of blue, and some white. Going about 4 fingers down from my green. And then it becomes a lot more purple from there. Now where these two colors, that green and that purple, met up, I want to make sure it has a nice smooth transition. So I'm going to clean off my brush just a little bit. And I'm going to go into a little bit of my yellow. And I'm going to pick up my chrome green. You can pick up any green or make a green, even go into your blue and green. and just kind of brush over it just ever so slightly. So see how I'm just blending that edge in ever so slightly. Now I'm just doing that on the corner where it was really, really noticeable. Maybe a little bit here. I'm just picking up a little more yellow, just kind of brushing it in and softening up any hard edges. Okay, so now I'm going to clean off that brush again. I got to keep going down on my canvas. My next color is a true lilac-y purple. So this time I'm taking equal amounts of red and blue. Now I like my lilac-y purples to be a little bit more on the blue side, so I add a little bit more blue always to them. If you like yours a little bit more on the red side, just pick up a little bit more red, add a little bit more red to it. I'm going to mix in my white to get it nice and soft. And here I have two different ones. I have a very soft one for about 2 fingers, and then a little bit deeper, so less white. So this one actually looks a little bit more like the darker one, so I'm just going to pick up some white and add it right in. And if you look, I'm overlapping. I'm not leaving any solid edges. Mine is all still wet. So as I go in and I stroke that back and forth, the colors are blending together really nicely. Now, once I get a little bit further down here, I'm going to take more of the true tones, less white, and keep going, making it a little bit darker before I get into my ground. And again, this is okay. If it doesn't look perfect, this is all our background. We're going to change that background up once we get into all the front details in this painting. So here I'm just going to make it a little bit darker, and this is personal preference. If you want it really dark like that, go ahead and keep it really dark. I'm going to get that color on there, and then I'm going to put a little bit of white right on my brush, or go right into that top layer that already has that white, and just soften it up ever so slightly. So here you can see as I'm going down, it's just softening ever so slightly by going into the layer above it. Okay. So I just went into some plain white there just to spread that color out a little bit more. I'm going to pick up more of my purple, go back into it. And I want to have about 4 fingers from the bottom there. We're going to clean off that big brush and we're going to get that ground in. Then we're going to give it just a second to dry because that's our whole background. We've got all that beautiful detail back there. So I'm cleaning off my brush again, dabbing it off on my paper towel. And now I have some of just the plain phthalo green and then some of my green and yellow mixed together. I'm going to start actually with the bottom, which is my green and yellow. And then I'm going to come in and make that phthalo green my darker green. Again, if you don't have all these different greens, you just want a more yellow green, a more blue green on top. So for me, I'm starting with that yellowy green, which if you can see what I'm doing here, it's my phthalo green, which is this kind of dark emeraldy green, mixing it with my yellow, coming in, and I'm going to get a few strokes of this. Now, I just want to make sure I'm doing nice horizontal strokes here, really smooth across my entire canvas. Again, if you are painting out that bottom edge, remember to lift it up so that you can get that bottom edge all the way painted. Now again, I have about 3 fingers of this, 3 fingers of that, or about 4 fingers total in here. And that's just a guesstimate. It's okay if your lines are a little bit different down here. We just want the idea that we have 2 layers of ground and all those different colors for the sky. So I have that layer in. I'm going to just pick up my plain green, and I am overlapping this with my sky and overlapping it with that lighter green, and just kind of making sure all these colors blend together. We don't want any harsh lines on our background. We are going to come in and cover them up, but it's nice to get rid of those now while we still can. So here we go. So at this point, my whole background's done, and I want to give it just a second to dry. Make sure that it's nice and ready to get all these beautiful dashes and swirls on top. So I stepped away from my painting just for a few minutes, just to give that background a few seconds to dry. It is not totally dry. I don't know if you can see this on camera, but it has a little bit of a sheen still on it, which tells me that it's wet in some areas. That's okay. It just means that when I go to add these next layers, that it might pick up a little bit of that background color, and I'm fine with that. What we're going to do next is start getting these great little swirls on there. I am just going down to my 3/4 inch brush to start, and then I'll go down to my 1/4 inch brush as well, just to get different size swirls. If you only had one brush or two brushes, it doesn't matter. We just want to get a few different sizes of these great swirls that you see in there. Now my swirls are in the dark greens, or in some lighter greens, or in some whites, or in some purples, some yellows. We spread those all out, ignoring this top arch and also where the ground is, but we're going to switch up the brushes. So to make this stroke, I want to make sure you guys see how to make this stroke. It's really simple. So I am just taking my brush, pushing it down, and really rolling it between my fingers, and it makes this great little swirl. We're doing that all over our canvas in those different tones. So I'm going to start pushing it down, rolling it, and swirling. Now I haven't reloaded my brush. I'm going to go as long as I can before it runs out of color. And then once it runs out of color, I can pick up some more. I just started with that dark green. Now this center area doesn't have as many strokes as some of those other areas, so I'm going to focus on those other areas first. And like I said, I'm going to go through and do in one color. I'm going to rinse off and pick up another color. And I don't care if there's a little bit of green still in there when I get my yellows. Now some of these can overlap each other even, so they don't need to be perfectly spaced out. I can do them right on top of each other. I can pick up that lilac. I did one there that was yellow, it didn't show up, so I could just change it up to my lilac or my purpley tone. I could change it up to that white tone. I'm going to go through with both my size brushes. So right now I just did some in that big brush. I'm also going to take my littler brush, and I'm doing one in white here so you can see it. Oh, I say that and then you can't see it. So that you can see it just like that. Same thing. Changing up what colors you use. You can use plain blues, you can use blue and whites, you can use some reds if you wanted, or even make some oranges. Make this kind of your own. Use the colors you like best as you keep going and doing this. I'm going to go ahead and continue and get all of these little kind of circles in. Then I'll come back so that you guys can see where it's at, and we'll go on to the next step. So I went back in and filled in all those swirls for my first layer. Now I'm going to come in with my smaller brush, so my 1/4 inch brush, and I'm going to add some dashes. Now my dashes are yellow, especially where this is very light. They are white up in here too. Then I have some in a light green. My light green is just my phthalo green and white, but you can make any green you want. I'm going to drag those down. Again, the only area I'm not getting too many in are an arch right down here and past my ground. So I'm going to start those. Again, just little dashes, just like this, spread out throughout my canvas. They're very short little dashes. I'm not going very far. I'm going to do a few down here so you can see them. I'm also doing them in that light green color I told you about. I'm not cleaning off my brush in between all of these, so I have a bunch of colors at once on here. I'm going to get all these dashes spread out throughout, and it's okay if they overlap. Again, I can overlap my swirls. I want to make sure I'm making layers. So it is better if I do have some that overlap, these swirls and overlap each other, just coming in close like that. I'm going to go ahead and do that again, making sure I don't put too many in the center little arch right at the bottom here. That's a little bit more open right there. But everywhere else I'm going to do those. The ones in the brightest area up here are going to be my lightest dashes, and a little bit more sparse. As I go out, they get a little closer together, a little thicker. As we come back, I have just filled in a bunch of those little dashes. Now I've used whites, light greens, yellows. I've even done some of the lilac-y colors. This is really personal preference. You fill in that whole background again, making sure to leave a lot of that top arch very free of color, and then just kind of another U down here without too much color in it. Now I'm going to come in, and again with that 1/4 inch brush, or if you have a tiny pointed brush, whatever works best for you. I'm going to get some of these tree trunks in with brown. Now my brown that I'm using is really transparent, so when I come in, it doesn't show a ton, and it's going to pick up some of these colors because this isn't totally dry. If you don't like it picking up those colors, give this a second to dry in your background before you come in. For me, I don't mind. Now my branches are just very loose lines with the trunk coming right into the ground. The trunk is going to be 2 strokes like that coming up, and then everything else gets thinner as we go up. Drag it through these colors, and we have some branches that go off from these, some that go straight up. I'm really touching my canvas very lightly to make some thin lines. I'm going to go through and do this. Now if you look at the original, those branches don't touch into this top arch area. They have different starting points on the bottom. In the grass, some come a little bit further down, some sit right on top, but none of them reach up into this yellow area. So I'm going to go ahead and get all those branches in, and then we're going to come add those last finishing touches to this. Now that we've got all those trees in, I'm going to give it just another second to dry, but my last step is going to be adding some of those swirls and those dashes that we did in that background back in. Really, this is totally your personal preference. We're going to fill in a little bit more. Now if I do those while this is still wet, it is actually going to make a little bit of a mess. It will pick up those colors. But what the idea is that you want to bring whatever color you liked. If I liked that yellow more, a little bit more of that yellow in, a little bit more of that white in, whatever tone it was that I liked, wherever I need to fill in. And I'm going to add some on top of those branches, some next to those branches, really overlapping a lot at this point. And again, a lot more of those little dashes in. So we're going to go with those 2 strokes, filling in that space until it looks like where we want it. I'm going to keep going with those 2 strokes. Again, I'll come back and show you what I have in the end. This is all personal preferences, so if you like it very open, very loose, you can keep it very open, very loose. If you like more detail in there, more lines in there, go ahead and make more lines. Now once I go in and get all of these, if I lose some of my branches and I've decided I want some of those branches to come back through again, I'll just re-add those branches in. So let me keep working on this. I'll show it to you in just a second once I get those lines and those dashes and those swirls back in. This again though, any color works. So I'm just using all those colors I had on the background for those dashes and those swirls. But if you like one of those colors a little bit more, or say maybe you want a pink, or you really want an orange, you can do those colors in this. Now I've gone in and filled in many more dashes, so we have all these extra little dashes that I've gone over and added over the branches. I've also gone in and added more swirls. Now, like I said earlier, this is all personal preference. You could leave it with them very spaced apart, or you could bring them in and overlap a lot of layers. So on this one, I've left it a little bit more sparse, but I could come in and fill in with a lot more swirls. I could make some swirls in those smaller brushes. I can fill in those dashes, and if you look here, I have my dashes overlapping each other a lot. So we aren't just spacing those swirls and those dashes out, we are really overlapping them. I'm letting my colors blend a little bit together on when I do that and not cleaning my brush off in between. Now, when you look at this one has a little bit more detail than this one. I can keep going in, but I think you guys get the idea. Just keep adding layers and layers. If you start losing too many of your branches, you can come back in and add those branches again. So there you have it. That's how we create this beautiful spring forest painting. Now, again, today I used acrylic on canvas, but you can recreate this image in watercolors or oil paints. If you are using watercolors, just make sure that you let each layer dry completely before you add the second layer. Again, with oils, you'd do the same thing. You'd paint that background with a very thin coat, using some oils to dilute those paints, and as you come forward and build up those layers, start thickening your paint using less oils. Make sure that if you were using oils, that you are not turning this to mud, so be very cautious of how you're applying those layers of paint. Again, I will have in the comments the paint brands that I use and those colors that I used, but if you don't have those colors, you can create this with just about any colors. Really, the important thing is those 3 primary colors and a white. Make sure that you have those, and you can create any of the paintings that I do in these tutorials. If you have any questions or comments, please put those below. I love to hear from you guys. I love to hear that you guys are enjoying these videos. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. I will see you guys all again next time. Enjoy painting.